Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today we're doing a deep dive into Nomad by Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Have you heard of this one?
Oh, absolutely. It's quite a powerful book.
I've heard.
It's a memoir, yes.
Yeah.
But it's also so much more than that. Ali uses her personal story to explore some really big, complex issues. Islam, feminism, immigration, the clash between traditional and modern values.
So it's a personal story, but also a sharp social commentary.
Exactly. And it's written with this raw honesty that's just captivating, I think. She doesn't shy away from difficult topics or controversial opinions.
And that sparked a lot of debate, I imagine.
Oh, you can bet on it. She's a very polarizing figure, but that's also what makes her work so thought-provoking.
Before we get into the specifics, can you give us a quick overview of the main themes? What's the journey we're about to embark on?
Well, the title itself, Nomad, is a big clue. Ollie's life is marked by constant movement, both geographically and intellectually. She's a nomad, always searching for a place to belong. The book takes us from her childhood in Somalia, through her changing relationship with Islam, her escape from a forced marriage, her experiences as an immigrant in the Netherlands and then in the United States, and finally to her call for reform within Islam. It's a story about identity, freedom, and the courage to challenge deeply ingrained beliefs.
That's quite a journey. I'm ready to dive in.
Yeah.
Let's start at the beginning with her early life in Somalia. What was that like?
Turbulent's a good word. She was born in 1969, and her family was constantly on the move. Somalia, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Kenya. Imagine being a child trying to make sense of the world,
Right.
and your world keeps changing.
Like that. That must have had a profound impact on her.
Yeah.
How did she talk about those early experiences shaping her?
Oh, absolutely. She describes this constant feeling of being uprooted, never quite belonging anywhere. And it's interesting, she even talks about how, as a child, she memorized her father's bloodline instead of the ABCs.
That's fascinating.
It really highlights how deeply ingrained tradition and lineage were in her upbringing. This constant movement, this search for belonging, it becomes a recurring theme throughout the book. It's almost like it laid the groundwork for her later embrace of religion and eventually her rejection of it.
So her early life kind of set the stage for her later struggles with identity and belief. What about her relationship with Islam? How did that develop?
Well, she was raised in a devout Muslim family, but her early religious education, she describes it as all about rote learning, memorizing the Quran without really understanding its meaning.
I see. So it was more about memorization than understanding.
Exactly. It was like being told what to think, not how to think. And I think there's a specific memory she shares that really drives this point home. It's the one where she talks about learning to light the charcoal brazier every morning under her grandmother's watchful eye.
Oh, yes. I remember that passage. She connects it to the idea of blind obedience, right?
Yeah.
Simply following rituals without questioning their purpose.
Precisely. And that's Ali's brilliance. As a writer, she uses these very vivid personal details to illustrate larger points. It wasn't just about lighting a brazier. It was about learning to conform, to accept things without question.
But she doesn't remain unquestioning forever, right?
No, she doesn't. And this is where things get really interesting. When she's in Kenya, she meets this inspiring teacher, Sister Aziza, who actually encourages her students to think critically about Islam.
Oh, wow.
This is a turning point for Ali. It's like a door opens, and she dives headfirst into religious devotion. She embraces Islam with a fervor she hadn't felt before. But this intense phase doesn't last forever either.
Why not? What makes her start questioning her faith?
Well, as she delves deeper into Islam, she begins to grapple with its restrictions on women, the way it often relegates them to a secondary status.
Right.
She starts to see these contradictions between the ideals of equality and justice that she's drawn to, and the realities of women's lives in many Muslim societies. It's a real struggle for her.
It's like she hit a wall. The faith that once offered her comfort and belonging now feels constricting.
Exactly. And then, at the age of 22, she's faced with this forced marriage arranged by her father. And this becomes a breaking point for her. She decides to flee.
Wow.
Seek asylum in the Netherlands. This is such a daring act of defiance. It's a rejection not just of the marriage, but of this whole system that seeks to control her destiny. She's taking her life into her own hands.
So this escape, it's more than just a physical journey. It's symbolic. It's about breaking free from tradition, from the expectations of her family and her culture.
Absolutely. And it's in the Netherlands, in this new environment, that her views on Islam really begin to solidify. She starts to embrace the values of the Enlightenment, individual liberty, reason, the separation of church and state.
It sounds like she's going through a radical intellectual transformation.
Oh, she is,
But it's not
definitely.
just about rejecting Islam, is it?
No, no, it's much more complex than that. She doesn't just abandon her faith completely. She starts to advocate for a reformation within Islam, a movement towards a more progressive and tolerant interpretation, one that aligns with these newfound values.
And that's where her idea of an enlightenment project for Islam comes in, right?
Exactly. And this idea, it becomes a central theme in the book. It's about finding a way for Islam to coexist with modern values, with individual freedom and critical thinking.
Okay, so she's escaped a forced marriage, found refuge in the Netherlands, and she's undergoing this intense intellectual and spiritual evolution. What's life like for her in this new country? What's it like to be Ayaan Hirsi Ali in the Netherlands?
Well, it's not all smooth sailing.
I imagine not.
She has to navigate a whole new set of challenges. Learning a new language, understanding a different culture, dealing with the complexities of the Dutch welfare system. And of course, there are the inevitable cultural clashes. She even mentions this one funny anecdote about not understanding the concept of savings when she first arrived.
Oh, that's
Like, she
interesting.
just didn't.
It's amazing how these seemingly small details can reveal these vast cultural differences.
Right.
It's a reminder that even basic concepts
Yeah.
that we take for granted
Yeah.
can be completely foreign when you're immersed in a new culture.
Absolutely. And through these personal experiences, the things she observes and goes through, Ali provides these really nuanced insights into the immigrant experience. She's challenging stereotypes and highlighting the real difficulties of integration. But it's not just about adapting to Dutch culture for her.
Right.
It's also about confronting her own evolving views on Islam.
So her personal journey and her intellectual journey are running parallel at this point.
They are. They are very much intertwined.
How does that play out?
Well, as she becomes more comfortable in the Netherlands, she also becomes more vocal in her criticism of Islam, particularly its treatment of women. She even starts working as an interpreter, which gives her this firsthand look at the struggles of other refugees and immigrants.
So she's seeing it from multiple perspectives now.
She is. She is.
But did her outspokenness about Islam cause any problems for her in the Netherlands? I mean, was there any pushback?
Oh, there was, and that's where things take another dramatic turn.
Yeah.
Yeah, as Ali becomes more outspoken, really starts voicing her criticisms, she starts facing some serious backlash,
All right.
particularly from within the Muslim community.
Right.
She's challenging these deeply held beliefs and traditions, and that can make people uncomfortable, even angry.
It makes you think about the limits of tolerance, doesn't it?
It does.
Like how much dissent is a society willing to accept, especially when it comes to religion? It's a tough question.
It's a crucial question, and, Ali's experience really highlights the risks that come with speaking out against the grain.
For sure.
It's not just about abstract ideas, it's about real-world consequences.
What kind of consequences did she face? What happened?
Well, she starts receiving death threats.
Wow.
Think about that for a moment, having to live with the constant fear that your words have made you a target.
That's terrifying. It takes immense courage to keep speaking out in the face of that kind of danger.
It does, and, her experience raises another important question.
What's that?
What role should the West play in protecting those who criticize Islam? Especially when those criticisms are coming from within the Muslim community itself.
Right.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Yeah, it gets to the heart of what free speech really means, doesn't it?
It does.
And how we balance the need for security with the right to express those dissenting views.
Exactly. And this tension is something that Ali really grapples with throughout the book. She's fiercely independent, committed to speaking her truth, but she's also acutely aware of the dangers involved.
So she's facing this intense backlash in the Netherlands. Is that what eventually leads her to leave for the United States? Is that what prompts that move?
It's definitely part of it. She starts to feel like she can no longer safely express her views in Europe.
Right.
Remember, she's already been through so much upheaval and displacement in her life.
She has, yeah.
She's seeking a fresh start,
Yeah.
a place where she can truly be free to speak her mind without fear of reprisal.
So she sees America as this beacon of freedom, a place where she can finally be herself.
That's how she portrays it, yes.
Interesting.
She sees America as this place where individual liberty is paramount, where open debate is valued.
Mm-hmm.
But, and this is where it gets interesting, she doesn't find the kind of unqualified acceptance she might have expected.
Really? How so? I would have thought that in America, with its First Amendment and its history of embracing free speech, that she would have found a more welcoming environment.
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
She does to a certain extent. But she also encounters resistance to her views on Islam, even in the U.S.
Hmm.
She argues that there's a certain reluctance in the West to criticize Islam, a kind of political correctness that she finds stifling.
So she's running up against the same kind of intellectual barriers, even in a country that prides itself on free speech.
That's her argument,
Oh,
yes.
wow.
She believes that this hesitancy to engage in an open and honest dialogue about the problems within Islam is actually counterproductive, that it prevents meaningful reform from happening.
So even in America, she's pushing boundaries, challenging people to confront these uncomfortable truths.
She is.
Is that what leads her to this idea of an enlightenment project for Islam? Does that come out of that experience as well?
It's definitely a key part of it. Remember, she's been on this long journey of questioning, challenging, and ultimately rejecting certain aspects of her faith.
Right.
But she's not simply rejecting Islam. She's trying to reimagine it to find a way to reconcile it with the values of modernity. You know?
Can you elaborate on that a bit? What does she mean by an enlightenment project for Islam? What would that look like in practice?
Well, she draws inspiration from the European Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason, individual liberty, and the separation of church and state.
Right.
She believes that Islam needs a similar movement, a kind of reformation that would promote critical thinking, challenge dogma, and reinterpret religious texts in light of modern values.
So it's about bringing Islamic thought into the 21st century, so to speak.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
She's essentially arguing that Islam needs to evolve to adapt to the changing world, and that this evolution requires a willingness to engage with ideas from outside the traditional Islamic framework.
That sounds like a pretty radical proposition, especially considering how deeply entrenched many of these traditions are.
And she knows it's not going to be easy.
Right.
She acknowledges that change will likely be slow and incremental, but she believes it is possible, and she points to historical examples of reform movements within other religions to show that it can happen.
So she's painting this grand vision of a reformed Islam. But what about the more personal aspects of her life? Does she talk much about her family relationships in Nomad?
She does, and they're complex, often strained by her choices and her evolving views.
Right.
For example, her father, who arranged the forced marriage she fled from, remains a distant figure throughout the book.
Makes sense.
You know, their relationship is marked by this unspoken tension, this fundamental disagreement about the course her life has taken.
That makes sense. It must have been incredibly difficult for her family to understand her decisions, especially given their cultural background.
It was, and she doesn't shy away from the pain and the sense of alienation that this caused.
Right.
But she also writes about her mother with a lot of warmth and compassion, even though they have very different beliefs.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I remember there's a powerful passage where she describes her mother visiting her in the Netherlands.
Yes.
And her mother, a devout Muslim, is baffled by Ali's secular lifestyle, but still expresses her love and concern. It's a poignant reminder that even when families disagree on these fundamental issues, those bonds of love can still endure.
It's a beautiful moment in the book, and it speaks to the complexity of Ali's journey.
Yeah.
You know, she's not just rejecting her past, she's trying to make sense of it, to find a way to honor her family's heritage while also forging her own path.
So she's grappling with these big ideas about Islam and modernity, and at the same time, she's navigating these very personal struggles with her family.
It's a lot to handle.
It's a lot, yeah. How does she manage to hold it all together?
Well, that's where her incredible strength and resilience come in.
I imagine.
Yeah. You know, she's faced with so much adversity throughout her life, from a turbulent childhood to a forced marriage to death threats, and yet she never gives up.
Right.
She keeps fighting for what she believes in, even when it's incredibly difficult.
She's definitely a force to be reckoned with. And I think that's what makes Nomad such a compelling read. It's not just a memoir. It's a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome these challenges and to fight for a better future.
I couldn't agree more. It's a book that challenges you, inspires you, and ultimately leaves you thinking about the world in new ways.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Her early life, her escape from a forced marriage, her experiences in the Netherlands and the U.S., and her evolving views on Islam.
We have.
But there's still one key piece of the puzzle. We haven't fully explored her vision for this enlightenment project within Islam. We've talked about the problem. She sees the need for reform. But what does that reform actually look like?
That's a great point.
What concrete steps does she propose?
Yeah, what does she actually envision?
And how do her views fit within the larger debates about Islam and modernity that are happening around the world?
Those are great questions. I think we need to delve a little deeper into the specifics of her argument and explore the potential implications of her vision. All right, so let's dig into the heart of Ali's Enlightenment project for Islam. What does she actually propose?
Yeah, we've talked about her criticisms, the need for reform, but what does that reform actually look like? What are the concrete steps?
Well, she lays out 5 pillars for this project, things she believes are essential for Islam to truly embrace modern values.
Okay, 5 pillars. Sounds
Yeah.
like a framework. What are they?
The first one, she says, is that Muslims need to reclaim their faith from these literalist interpretations of Scripture.
Yeah.
She argues that too much emphasis is placed on blind adherence to these ancient texts without considering the context or contemporary realities.
Right.
And this echoes her own experience with rote learning, right?
Yes.
Memorizing without understanding. And she believes this fosters a culture of unquestioning obedience, which hinders critical thought. It's about moving beyond simply following rules to grappling with the deeper meaning and purpose behind them.
Okay, so pillar 1, reinterpreting scripture. What's next?
Second, Ali calls for separating mosque and state.
Okay.
She sees this fusion of religious and political authority as a root cause of many problems in the Muslim world.
That's interesting because a lot of Western democracies also have historical baggage with the church's influence on government, right?
Exactly. And Ali draws parallels there.
Yeah.
She believes that true religious freedom thrives when faith is a personal matter, not dictated by the state.
Okay, so I'm seeing a pattern here. It's about empowering individuals to think for themselves, both in their faith and in their relationship with government. What's pillar 3?
This one's big. Actively rejecting Sharia law as the basis for any legal system.
Yeah.
Ali views Sharia as incompatible with universal human rights, particularly when it comes to women and minorities.
That's a bold statement and likely to ruffle some feathers. It challenges a fundamental aspect of traditional Islamic practice.
It does, and it's one of the most controversial points in her argument. She believes that progress requires embracing secular legal systems that protect individual liberties for all citizens, regardless of their religious beliefs.
Okay, pillar 4.
Embracing a culture of tolerance and reason.
Hmm.
Ali calls for open dialogue, both within and between different faiths. She believes this is essential for dispelling misconceptions and fostering mutual understanding.
So it sounds like she's advocating for a more nuanced and open-minded approach to religious discourse, moving away from this rigid dogma.
You got it. And she sees education as key here, promoting critical thinking skills from a young age, encouraging people to engage with diverse perspectives and to question what they're told.
Okay, 4 down, 1 to go. What's the final pillar of this Enlightenment project?
Ali urges Western societies to support this reform movement from within Islam. She criticizes what she sees as a tendency to tiptoe around sensitive cultural issues, fearing accusations of Islamophobia.
So she's saying that Western societies need to be more vocal allies to those advocating for change.
Exactly. She believes that true tolerance involves standing up for universal values, even if it means challenging certain aspects of another culture. It's about supporting those who share those values, regardless of their background.
It's about finding that balance, isn't it? Respecting cultural differences while also promoting human rights and freedom of thought.
Precisely. And Ali argues that staying silent in the face of injustice, out of some misguided sense of cultural sensitivity, ultimately does more harm than good.
So she's laid out this roadmap, these 5 pillars for an Enlightenment project in Islam. But how realistic is it? Can such a fundamental shift actually happen?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And Ali acknowledges the challenges. She knows that change won't come easily or overnight, but she believes it is possible, and she points to historical examples of reform movements within other religions to show that it can happen.
And she argues that change often starts with these individual voices speaking out, challenging the status quo, and gradually shifting the tide of public opinion.
Exactly. She sees her own work as part of that effort. Nomad itself is an attempt to spark conversation, to push people to think critically about Islam and its place in the modern world.
It's a powerful call to action. But some critics argue that she's oversimplifying complex issues, that her vision of an Islamic enlightenment is overly idealistic or even Western-centric. What do you think?
Well, there's definitely some validity to those criticisms.
Right.
It's important to acknowledge that there's a diversity of opinions within Islam, and not everyone will agree with Ali's perspective.
Of course.
And of course, imposing Western values on other cultures is never the answer. But I think it's more about fostering dialogue, creating space for those within Islam who are already pushing for reform. Ali sees herself as amplifying those voices, adding fuel to that fire, so to speak.
Exactly. Whether or not you agree with her specific prescriptions,
Uh,
I think the value of Nomad lies in its power to provoke thought,
yes,
to challenge assumptions, and to force us to grapple with these complex issues in a deeper way.
it really does make you think.
It's a reminder that these conversations are ongoing, and there are no easy answers.
Nope.
It's about engaging with nuance, considering different perspectives, and ultimately working towards a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Well said. And I think Ali, with her personal story and her unwavering commitment to her beliefs, has made a significant contribution to that ongoing conversation.
It's a book that stays with you.
It does,
And I think that's a mark of truly powerful writing.
for
It
sure.
challenges you, inspires you, and maybe even changes the way you see the world.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
definitely worth a read.
Okay, listeners, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Nomad. We hope you found it insightful, and we encourage you to pick up the book yourself and continue the conversation. It's a journey worth taking.